Turing test is, in a sense, the essence of the Turing test is you can't tell what you're interfacing with, right? A real person or a artificial intelligence. But the question of how real is the real person kind of never comes up, and I think that's part of the crux of the issue. Are we simulations?
Well, I think we are, because that makes the math easy. Quantum, the quantum mechanics math, when you have the multiverse and the probabilities and the Venn diagram and Big Two and all that stuff, that to me makes a lot of sense. But if we are simulations, we do have, well, it appears to me we have access to something bigger, which is the causal field, which is where all the magic happens. But I don't think that the machines will have access to that, because it seems to be a biological function rather than a mechanical or electronic function. So, there's a thing about, can robots dream? I don't think so.
Can robots dream? Well, do androids dream of electric sheep? We just saw Blade Runner 2049, and we were fans of the first one. And if you haven't seen it, go. It's amazing. Have any of you seen it?
I haven't seen it.
No, I haven't seen it either.
It's worth looking at, and maybe a couple of times. It's pretty incredible for just the cinematography alone. It was
better than the first one.
I would say it's on a par with the first one. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's it raises a lot of questions. The big drawback is it's 2 3/4 hours long, so make sure you pee before you go into the theater. If you're like me, I had to go pee like 3 minutes before the end. I could not wait. But anyway, it was definitely interesting, and it raises a lot of these relevant questions,
Yeah, I have a suggestion for you, Dennis.
Okay.
Because I used to be up all night peeing, like 4 or 5 times easily, and now I'm not at all. And that's because of my new device, which is actually just here, the PyraLight. I was going to talk to you in Turing about it, but we never had time because you're super busy. But it's pulsed infrared and magnetics. And actually, John has one. But what happened to me is, after using this, now I'm actually sleeping on the floor, on a mat in my wooden house. I don't get up and pee, and I sleep really well. And I actually use it when I'm flying. I put it behind my back, and on the plane, no jet lag. So as you're a big jet lag person, I think you need to have one of these.
I'm a big jet lag person, and I'm a big sleep disorder person. I have all kinds of problems getting to sleep, but I don't have problems getting to sleep. I can get to sleep, and sometimes I use the binaural beats, and that really helps. I take melatonin. I can get to sleep. My problem is I wake up in the middle of the night, like any time between 3 and 4 in the morning, and I cannot get back to sleep. And as a result, I'm tired all day, and I seem to be insensitive to stimulants. I mean, I take caffeine, I take Zembrin, I take modafinil, I just pile on all these stimulants, and they sort of don't work. That makes me think, I can take an Adderall or something like that and lie down for a nap an hour later. So if your marvelous machine will solve my sleeping problems, Guy, I'll be an even bigger fan of yours and promote So how do I get my hands on one of these? You have to send it
I'd
to
be
me.
happy.
Right?
Yeah, I'll just send it to you. If you send me your address, I'll send. I'd be delighted to. John has one.
Okay.
I'm sure he can comment. But also Gillian Maxwell, you remember in Vancouver.
Yes.
Yeah, so she has one, but it was really funny when I gave her one. She said, "Oh, do you like to do trades?" I said, "Oh, yeah, that sounds great. I love to do trades." And she said, "Oh, I know somebody because of the Harm Circle who's got the best quality CBD oil."
Ah,
And so
okay.
she took me to this anonymous woman's house. I mean, we were sort of driving around in the forest and found it. And she'd got this CBD oil, which was in 1 gram, it was 400 milligrams of CBD and 200 milligrams of THC. And it was something called Purple Haze, which I think you might remember from the 60s.
I remember.
Really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got 22 grams of this oil in exchange for one of these. That was the deal.
Oh,
That's a pretty good deal. That's a great deal.
Yes.
Yeah. This machine, this device is not so expensive as the Ajna Light, eh?
No, this is 999.
Yeah.
I've sold about 150 of them. They're going really well. Actually, one thing is, for example, with diabetics, there's a woman in Australia who's used it for a few months, and she's off all her medications. She's had everything, including 10 insulin shots a day for 25 years.
Yeah.
And now, just in the last week or two, she said her body's saying no to all the meds,
Wow.
which is really...
What do you think are the mechanics behind it, Guy?
Well, we were discussing this before, weren't we, John? But one thing I do know, because I just did a video, the LEDs, when they're facing into the body, we put, Dr. Chris put an acupuncture needle into the arm, and so we had the scope on there and grounded, the ground lead.
Mm-hmm.
And it was inducing a large voltage deep inside the body with the infrared LEDs. When you turned it the other way around, so it was just magnetic, so it was about half the voltage. So, real measurable electric signals are being generated inside the body. What I think, if you like, in a more esoteric way, slightly more esoteric way, but not much more, in Taoism, you've got light is yang, and magnetics, the earth, is yin. So because this is a really strong Tesla air coil, it's huge. It's on two sides of the board. It's generating a Tesla field, a magnetic field, pulse magnetic field, that's 30 times stronger than the background earth field. And that's in Schumann and also for 40 hertz. Those are two of the frequencies I'm using, as well as delta, which is to help Dennis get sleep in the middle of the night. So those three signals together are acting very synergistically. Schumann is now running up at 500 hertz, so it restores the 8 hertz signal. That's one thing. 40 hertz is really important for the brain, because 40 hertz is a signal that when the two hemispheres of the brain sync up, you get this 40 hertz signal. And we use that a lot in the Neurolight. But also, John, could you comment about magnetics and DMT? Because that was what you were looking into.
Well, I just think that there's a definite link in terms of, I guess, what we might call chi or electromagnetic fields, and in terms of inducing either DMT within the recipient as well as the sender is generating it through, I guess, straddling certain brainwaves, right? Because from my own research and my own experiences, it seems as though when we get into our deep states, we're like in a theta state, or even some of us are in a light delta state. And when we have our focal points in terms of like our healing or something like that, then we almost like straddle the slow waves with the fast waves at the same time. So you're seeing like a theta gamma bump simultaneously. And it seems as though that's what's causing the spike in DMT, or it correlates with these expansion of our fields or something of that nature. But it's obviously a very complex situation. one of the interesting things that I've been thinking about recently was that, most of the discussion about DMT is about regarding the pineal gland. And I happen to think that there's a possibility that DMT is actually produced throughout all the glial cells. So that's actually the majority of the nervous system. Just trace amounts. I almost feel like it's just switches, and it's not anything that you would ever really see in the bloodstream per se. But I do feel that there's the potentiality for that sort of release regionally, not even just pineal. So I think that, yeah, there's a lot going on there. I can't really explain the whole thing though.
Right, right. Well, it's a, it's an interesting theory. You're good at coming up, John, with these hypotheses that can't really be verified. Because we don't have the tools to measure that kind of thing. How would you measure that in the glial cells? I guess.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to dig into that like crazy. But so you think that that's something that we don't have the capabilities to verify right now at all?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on this, but it's the same issue that we face with the pineal gland, and the Ajna Light. Does it really stimulate DMT synthesis? That's the question. Not that it doesn't do great things, even if it doesn't do that. I'm not saying people are getting therapeutic effects from it, but so far, unless there's been a breakthrough in the last few months, nobody has been able to say, it stimulates DMT synthesis in the pineal. Is that true? Are we still in that place where this is a reasonable speculation, but there's no evidence one way or the other for it?
Sort of like the near-death experience. It's going to be a hard thing to quantify, huh?
Right.
Yeah, I think it would just be inferences, right? So you would look at, I guess, data acquired based on exogenous DMT ingestion, whether it be ayahuasca or just smoked DMT, and maybe you would look at the EEG data, and you would correlate that with the EEG data for Ajna Light, and maybe see some overlap, which we did see in our pilot study. So it's in terms of a definitive like blood pool while somebody's under the Ajna Light to see an increase in DMT. No, I mean I don't know if that's possible, honestly.
But your results, the QEEG results are really interesting. Do you want to go into that a little bit, John?
Yeah, well, when I was talking with Eat Fresca at Tyringham Hall, he mentioned to me that he definitely believes that there's a correlation with gamma wave formation in the brain and DMT. So like there's a synergy there, or the DMT is causing the gamma wave, or the gamma wave is causing the DMT release. But what was interesting with the Ajna Light, the QEEG pilot study that we did with 11 people in July, was that we saw a 300% gamma wave increase in some of the participants. Not in all the participants, but just some of the ones that we were able to get clean data. And that is significantly more than even just what was seen from DMT itself. So when they smoked DMT, I think it was like a 75% increase in gamma wave amplitude, and under the Ajna Light, for some people it went up to like 300%. So there's something powerful going on there. But like I said, to generate information from the blood when a lot of action is taking place in the brain, that's going to be really difficult to quantify and measure.
Yeah.
What luck have you been having with the Ajnahuasca experiments, the pre-dosing with the beta carbonates? Are you getting any interesting results out of that?
Yeah, we got some interesting results, and another aspect that we've been integrating with the Ajna Light is cannabis, and I've been getting some really interesting results with that. It seems as though there is some sort of synergy taking place, and I've heard from multiple people that it really amplifies the effects. Another thing that I wanted to mention was that we did the the QEEG study at a float center, and we left the light at the float center for a couple weeks. And during that time, some people would float before the light, some people would float after the light. And what was interesting is the effects of people that did the light after they floated for an hour. There was a consistency and there was an intensity that basically everybody saw. And some people were veteran psychonauts, and some people were completely naive and never touched a hallucinogen in their life. And they all pretty much described the same experience, which was flying through space, being on another planet, seeing like patterns of faces, very intricate geometric patterns. So it's interesting to look at the mechanisms that I guess induce more visionary states, because I think Ajna Light's always going to be doing something, but under certain circumstances, it seems to have a more propensity to, I guess, drive those visionary states. And that's why I think, in terms of the Ajnahuasca thing, it's more of like priming the body, priming the brain prior to the Ajna Light, so you can have those experiences.
Right. But when you do the float, and what happened with the people who did the light before the float?
It was the way they described it's almost like a hyperactive mind inside the float. So it was a little bit more. It was almost like a stimulant, and it was difficult to kind of get into a deep state of relaxation, because one thing that was mentioned was that the creativity levels were kind of off the charts. So when they did the light and they went into the float, it wasn't a relaxing float. It was more of a stimulatory, creative sort of situation.
Had all these people floated before?
Some yes, some no.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so that's what to me was the most interesting thing, because it was a mix of people. Some people were veteran floaters, some people were veteran psychonauts, some people were naive floaters and naive psychonauts, or naive non-psychonauts. So it was a mix of people, but there was a deep consistency. So I guess to elaborate further on that, I think Nick Cozy has a theory in terms of DMT. Actually, there's a load phase and an activation phase. And I happen to believe that the slow wave, basically our theta and delta waves, is when we have the DMT loading into the neurons, and then the activation phase is the gamma wave when we're getting excited. But I think that the slow wave, obviously it's integrated with the float. Basically you're at a deep theta for an hour, and I think that's what causes that experience with the Ajna Light after, is that you're just loading up for an hour, and then boom, you hit it with the Ajna. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's funnily enough, I was at the Float Center in Chiang Mai today. There's one that's been going for a couple of months. It's my third float, and exactly what you say goes on for me. I was visualizing stuff I'm working on to do with the PyraLight. I'm experimenting a little personally as well, because I'm after Turing and learning the benefits of microdosing. I've been microdosing, and in particular, just experimenting with psilocybin and psilocybin plus BCAP, the high tea that I brought to Turing.
Yeah.
You remember that. So
yes.
What I've been finding is actually my last psilocybin journey, which was only the third I've ever done, but I was using a tincture, a full dose with BCAP before, and I hadn't actually read the research that says that psilocybin gets MAOI'd enhanced if you do that. But what happened to me is I saw a visual of 9 TV screens in a 3x3 matrix. There was a different trip going on in each one. In other words, some were spinning this way in different colors, some were doing that. My brain was activated 9x what it would have been in the visuals in the previous ones. So that to me was quite good. But funnily enough, again with the PyraLight, because I use the PyraLight. I just put it on my body in the morning and hold some crystals, because I'm weird. I like to do that kind of thing.
Well, we know that, Guy, but we love him anyway. Yeah.
So this one day, I was just doing it, and I get all this chi coming out of my hands and my feet. You know, it's the lagong and the babbling brook, just buzzing and buzzing. And then one day, I was in the middle of this weirdest trip. It was a lucid dream, but it was a trip lucid dream. And it was a combination of different experiences I had, but my body was really feeling it. Like it was actually going on. So because, you know, what John's mentioning, because the PyraLight actually has all those three components. It's got delta, 2 hertz. It's got the theta, you know, the borderline theta for 8 hertz for Schumann, and it's got 40 hertz right on the important frequency in gamma, you know, the one that correlates the brain. So somehow it got me there, sort of legally.
Well, that's no fun.
I know.
Don't you want the thrill of beating the law enforcement infrastructure?
I know you're waiting for LEDs to be banned.
Well, if you guys keep up this work, I'm sure they will be, you know, sooner or later, because, you know, as we know, this is a war on consciousness, not a war on drugs. So, you know.
Let me ask you this, Dennis. What's going on in terms of getting this stuff funded, like this DMT research stuff?
Well, you know, the kind of work that you want to do, you mean? I am not, I don't know. You know, I don't know if anybody's trying to get this work done. And how would you approach it? That's the thing. You know, you got to have some kind of a protocol that you think will work.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I would think that Nick Cozy would be probably the person that would lead the charge on that if it's going to happen. Are you in touch with him?
I've been in touch with him, not recently. It's not like we know each other.
Yeah. You don't know each other. Okay. Well,
I mean, like just through one email. I'm getting a little I guess feedback from somebody.
Yeah, echo coming from your side there, John.
Is it from it's my end?
Yeah, I wasn't hearing it when Dennis or Guy were talking.
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, I remember what I wanted to ask you. Did you, either of you, see Dave Nichols' talk at Breaking Convention?
Yeah, I wrote about it.
Yeah, did you see it? I don't know if I think it's on video. Probably the videos that they put up there, but you haven't seen it, right?
I saw it on YouTube.
You did. Okay.
Yeah. I watched the whole thing.
Okay. Did you see it, Guy?
I remember when you talked about it, I had a quick look. I didn't see the whole thing. I read the comments.
Okay. Okay. I just wondered because he's kind of being the skeptic on this, and you know, and he's a formidable skeptic because he knows what he's talking about, and you know, I guess the take-home lesson that he is saying is that the known affinity of DMT for these receptors, mostly the sigma-1 and the serotonin receptors, I think is, you know, the physiological levels of DMT would never get close to that, basically. It would never be sufficient to induce a DMT-like effect. So he's sort of on the side that says it's, you know, it really doesn't have that kind of an endogenous function. I think you can challenge it in various ways, but I just wonder what you think? What your impression, or since you paid attention to that, John, what do you think?
I think that you know, the discussion needs to be very comprehensive. I think he put together a pretty good argument for it not being, but I think that it's too intertwined with the exogenous perspective. So basically, you inject DMT, you smoke it, you pull it from the bloodstream. It's not how it works, obviously, endogenously. Those aren't the mechanisms. So we have to look at different perspectives in terms of measuring, I guess, these altered states. Because he's basically accepting the fact that altered states do exist, but he just doesn't think DMT is involved. And some of his arguments were a little contradictory, in my opinion, based on, I think when Strassman did his DMT study, it showed that, you know, levels of other hormones skyrocketed as well, right? Mm-hmm. So his perspective was that in these altered states, it's not DMT, it's other hormones skyrocketing as well. It's dynorphin, that's what he mentioned, but he also mentioned glutamate and some other stuff that I don't remember off the top of my head, but these molecules don't act singularly, right? I mean, it's not like you take DMT and it's just that doing the activity. There's a whole cascade effect. And in these altered states, there is a whole cascade effect taking place as well. So I think that in terms of looking at endogenous DMT, I think it's really important to focus on the other side, which is the monoamine oxidase. I think that activity it's really important to look at, because I mean, ayahuasca is comprised of both monoamine oxidase inhibition and DMT. So in terms of our body, we have plenty of monoamine oxidase inhibitors as well. So we got to look at the upregulation of those during these altered states, and we can extrapolate information that way. But if we only focus on DMT levels, I think we're missing the proper perspective, which is we are an endohuasca system. So we have to focus on monoamine oxidase inhibition. Even more, that might even be more important than just trying to measure the DMT. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think intuitively, I think that's right. I think that, you know, the DMT is there probably all the time at fairly low levels, and maybe it is that these various endogenous MAO inhibitors are essentially the regulators, and they are in control of, in other words, when does it reach the concentration where it can have an effect on these receptors. That could be regulated by endogenous MAOs, MAOIs. Sounds like a reasonable hypothesis to me. And then if you postulate that, again, your point about he's looking at it from the perspective of exogenous, effects of DMT, and you have to allow for the pharmacokinetics and all this. We don't really know in vivo what the concentration is at the receptor. This is,
yeah.
But it may be endogenous MAOI can regulate it. So the DMT, if it has a function, is regulated, it's released at specific places in the brain and other parts of the body, and the effect is masked unless, or not detectable unless MAOI plays a role. Kind of like, by analogy, you can take DMT orally, until the cows come home, and nothing's going to happen until you take an MAO inhibitor with it.
Yeah.
So it's some similar kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's that paper I think I showed you at Turing about just hydroxyl radicals suppressing MAO activity like heavily, and that's just reactive oxygen species. So I mean, that's going on like crazy within us. Another study that I came across recently that really opened my eyes was it was like something like 95% of humans and animals with cancer showed significant monoamine oxidase A suppression. And it was interesting because I think there was a paper a couple years ago, a study regarding seeing DMT in a melanoma cell line. Do you remember that one?
No, actually, but take your word for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, the question is, well, what is DMT doing in a cancer cell line? Like, what purpose would it serve? I mean, if it's just a hallucinogen that is used during transcendental states or we access it, that's one thing. But if we're seeing DMT in a cancer cell line, that's another thing. And that's why my perspective is that DMT is a very functional molecule within us. It's not just for the dream state or just for hypnosis or whatnot. There's actually it's an antioxidant within us. I think E. Fresca has done enough research to point that out, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I think there's evidence for that for sure. It's multifunctional. Um, and there is a temptation to focus only on the detectable effects, the altered states and all that. But what is it doing otherwise? I mean, but this is very hard to.
Yeah, I think that the microdosing is really valuable there. That's what I'm seeing, particularly the neurotransmitter aspect of DMT, which Dr. Harrison, Steve Barker's student, the video you sent me, that was very, very interesting. That it does have all the properties of a neurotransmitter, and LSD generates 100 times the DMT. So if it's activating in the microdose level, which we could see people doing very well cognitively into old age, microdosing with LSD, then, there's a very positive, non-hallucinatory aspect of DMT, and as John says, in normal functioning.
Yeah, I mean, even in Strassman's study, right? There was four levels of administration, and at the lowest level, it was just like enhanced mood, like. And that's the thing, we need to be cognizant of not putting DMT in a box where it's just aliens, because it's so much more. It's from the low level to the high level, but there's a lot of different changes taking place throughout the body. I think I pointed that out in the one article I wrote called Measuring DMT Formation in Humans. There's so many anatomical changes taking place, measurable changes taking place during these altered states. We can't deny that these states exist. Whether DMT is actively involved, I think so. But the most important thing in my perspective is getting people to accept that this phenomena is a reality. It's part of our reality. So one of my, I guess, big missions is to promote a functional perspective of DMT, such as like the healing that takes place from like Qigong masters or stuff like that, because we don't. Western science doesn't really understand how that works. And I think that, I guess, integrating the DMT conversation within those healing effects would help, I guess, merge that conversation a little bit. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I'm echoing, I think. Somebody's echoing. I can hear my own echo. Anyway, yeah, I think that's much more sort of reflects Edie's perspective on this question. He's more or less said the same thing, that he thinks DMT has multiple effects on different physiological functions. It's not. I mean, it's there for a reason. It's doing various things affecting the immune system and so on. And the psychological effects may be secondary. That's maybe not the most important thing it's doing, or depending on how you want to rank that. But it's doing, many. It has multiple functions. So
yeah,
sorted out.
It's interesting. I guess, kind of like looking back in terms of the original hypothesis, like talking about DMT and schizophrenia, I actually feel like DMT is playing a big role in trying to repair the brain. Because if you've ever looked at the brain scan of somebody with schizophrenia, it's very, I don't know, it's not developed well. And they just recently found out that schizophrenics' brains are constantly trying to repair themselves. And it's interesting how, I guess, we take a symptom like somebody hearing something or seeing something, maybe a like we label it as a hallucination, and then we almost take that symptom and encapsulate the disease around that just one symptom, but we don't really understand, I guess, anatomically the changes that took place. So I think that DMT is like a complete repair molecule for the body. That's just really what it looks like. And in schizophrenia specifically, it's definitely seems as though it's trying to like offer some repair mechanisms for the brain, regeneration. But the hallucinations are just a side effect of that mechanism.
I think that's a very good point, John. Yeah. And so one thing in my experiments for myself, one thing I'm doing is I take BCAP-E. I do oolong tea in the morning, and then I put some BCAP-E mix powder, after powdering it, and I just leave it all day fermenting with flaxseed and stuff like that. And so it's, if the MAOI, if I'm, daily, if you like microdosing, because it's just a small amount, maybe a teaspoon of it, if that is beneficial to the processing of DMT for repair, then it will show up. And actually, all I can say, I can't measure this, I can't tell you where I am on the wackiness scale, but I do feel really functional, and more so than I did previously. So, I could just say the things I'm doing seem to be upregulating me. And the microdosing with daily BCAP-E is to me, a really good thing to do. I can tell the difference, like cognitive ability and stuff like that.
That's interesting you say that, Guy, because I smoke the leaf myself daily. I mean, sometimes before using cannabis, sometimes just in the morning, as you're saying. And, I do work as a computer tech, and so I really can tell when my mental state is hyper-focused and when I'm not. And since I've been doing this, it seemed like it took some days to, kick in, for lack of a better word. But since I've been doing it, I'm getting more done earlier in the day. There's various things that I have notes about, and it's just from smoking the leaf. So that's interesting you say that. I had a question for you about, you said that you used it with psilocybin. Was that the 9 TV screen thing?
Yeah, the 9 TV. Yeah, so it was, we call it high tea.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically Syrian rue and BCAP-E. And so what I did was, a friend of mine did it too. We made the tea, drank the tea, and then did ceremony and drank the psilocybin, because this psilocybin was a tincture. We left it overnight to let the alcohol evaporate, but it's the whole plant. And it's actually really beautiful and gentle way of doing it, but it amped me up. The BCAP-E amped up the response compared to the previous 2 times by this factor of 9. It was really interesting how my mind said, I was looking, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And I was counting, 9 screens. So it's like my brain was saying, I'm running 9 times faster.
Or you're 9 times more fragmented than usual, baby.
Well, schizophrenic. I've got nine personalities going on.
Right.
Let me ask you a question, Dennis. I wanted to ask you about, in terms of what type of, I guess, if somebody has a disease, let's call it diabetes, cancer, arthritis, whatever. Have you seen any healing components of ayahuasca? Have you seen some healings take place?
No. I mean, there's anecdotal reports about cancer, right? And ayahuasca.
Yeah.
They're really anecdotal. There has not been, any kind of controlled study. I would not be surprised if it does have an effect, because it can affect the immune system. And we're now learning all of these things that Hardy does that really was sort of overlooked for a long time. Now it turns out Hardy's got all kinds of interesting, activities besides being an MAO inhibitor. It inhibits this kinase, DYRK1, which just has to do with neurogenesis and Down syndrome. I don't know if you looked at my presentation on that at the Psychedelic Science conference last April. Excuse me. It's up there. I can send you the keynote, but you can find the video up there. Now, I'm not, basically I'm just reporting about what other people have said, and then also Dale Millard at the Turing conference gave a talk about harming, but the tech connection, it was not very good, but all those videos are up there now. I can send you all links to the videos of the presentations at Turing, and you can look at that. But I think that there is these reports about cancer, and who knows, that's the main one. I can give you an anecdotal story about an experience I have, which I don't know what to make of it exactly, but so I was this was like 2000 or about that time. I was going down to Eduardo Luna's retreat center in Florianopolis, and I had invited a friend of mine to come down, right? And he was ready to come down. The day before he was supposed to leave, he went snowboarding, and somebody smashed into him, at a high velocity. Anyway, he had extremely destroyed the meniscus in his knee. It really was a bad knee injury. And he called me and he said, I'm on all these opiates, I'm in terrible shape, my knee is swollen up and all that, I can't come, And I said, well, just come, get off the opiates, but come. If you can make it on the plane, you don't have to hike around or anything, you can just come and hang out at this posada where we were doing the retreat, and get here if you can. So he did. He took a 36-hour flight. It was a nightmare. He was literally a basket case. when they got to this place, they carried him in a hammock. They carried him into this country, and just he was the picture of misery and pain. And he took the ayahuasca the first night, and I was sitting beside him, and this injured leg that he had, he kept lifting it up in the air and sort of waving it around in the air. And I said, Prayman, don't do that. You're going to hurt your leg. He says, no, this is what I'm being told to do. This feels good. The next morning, the swelling went way down, and
wow.
Get to date, and he took the next one, and the same thing happened. Rapid improvement. By the time we were done with this retreat, he threw away his crutches. He went into the jungle with some shaman for 5 weeks, and the doctors who had looked at it before he left, had told him, you're going to need surgery, and you're going to need weeks of rehabilitation for this to resolve. What the hell was going on? I mean, I was thinking marked anti-inflammatory effect, but I think there's got to be more to it. And I witnessed this. I saw this happen, and I was impressed.
Wow.
And that, so is that something that ayahuasca does specifically, or does ayahuasca activate certain, neural processes or the immune system that has to do with cell regeneration? I don't know. There's a lot to still be learned.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it jolted his autonomic nervous system to fix itself or something. That's amazing.
Seems that, yeah. I have not heard similar reports, but that one is, that one I witnessed, And he did go back eventually, after he got done with his trip, he went to the doctor that had been looking after him. They did an MRI, which is how on his knee. They said, we can't see damage. You never had the. So there you go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Dennis, one thing that I think plays a lot into these kind of miraculous healings is obviously the belief system. It's a shamanic kind of thing, and the mind can rearrange the body amazingly, like in zero time, if the belief is present. So somehow you getting him into the environment where everyone was earth-centered and positive energy, compared with the allopathic, you're screwed, pay your bill now, all that kind of thing. I would have thought would facilitate him making a complete leap of consciousness to allow his body to say, oh, I don't need this anymore, and reorganize itself. I mean, like John of God or, any of the other amazing healings, the mind is capable of reordering the body in quite remarkable ways when the environment's conducive.
Yeah, exactly. And it appears that that's exactly what happened. Something like that in this environment enabled him to, as you say, sort of re-understand at a sort of somatic cellular level. Just, I don't need this. But it was incredible. I wanted to ask you, Guy, you said you've been microdosing. What are you microdosing with? Psilocybin or LSD, or can you?
Oh, okay. Well, I started off with LSD at 5 micrograms. But then actually what I'm doing now is a combination of that and the psilocybin. Again, just microdose. And what I do is
all of this together: B copy, psilocybin, LSD.
So it's a daily thing. The B copy I have in my tea when it's fermented and everything at night. But what I'm doing is it's like my body's just on that groove. And I started off just with the LSD microdose because of what I learned at Turing. But particularly Ralph Metzner, I mean, that was amazing watching him, how he's, functional, and he's clearly in his 80s. I don't know quite how old he is, very bright. Yeah. But then it seemed to me, why don't I add in the psilocybin? Because the psilocybin is very yin, whereas the LSD is yang. And it's subclinical, I'm not flying or doing that kind of thing. But I feel very harmonious. I go for a walk in my land, and then I do my Qigong practice and my yoga. And my whole being, it's a joyful process. And it's actually inspired me to add a lot more nature-based Tantra visualizations into my practice. And some pretty weird stuff, which have come to me, which I would never have thought of before. Like the planetary influences in the days of the week in the Dzogchen chart of the 4 pure lights. I mean, just to give you an idea, that came out of the blue, but it arose from this different consciousness, subtle consciousness that's going on, which is outside egoic mental control or analysis and generation through logic. It's somehow things are being suggested to me that I would say come from the causal plane or the Akasha or whatever you like to say, and they're pretty out there. I mean, I'm using Tesla's numbers now. I worked out why his circle was so interesting, and then 3, 6, and 9 he used as the imaginary numbers, and the other it starts off 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. And I was looking at it, and it's a infinity. But if you think about it, 1, 2, 4, 8 is an exponential doubling, you know,
Right.
by 1, by 2, by 4. And then 7 and 5 and 1 is an exponential decrease. So it's drawing out a sine wave. So I do that. But the 3, 6, and 9, and I added 0, so it goes 3, 6, 9, 3, 6, 0. That's a Merkaba. You know, you've got the two star tetrahedron, you know, the two aspects of star tetrahedron coming together, causing a torus when they spin. So that's the kind of visualization that's come up, which I would not have dreamed of if I wasn't, how can I say, if DMT, no, let's put it correctly. If psilocybin and LSD were not dreaming me. It really feels like that. It's the other way around.
Well, boy, I must not be doing this right, because I never had anything like that. You know, I was microdosing with LSD for a while, and you know, it was 5 micrograms every 3 days. That was what was recommended to me, and that worked for a while. Nothing spectacular like that, but just a slight boost in cognitive function. And again, like I do have this sleep problem, so that helped, because you know, my normal routine is read the paper and I'm ready for a nap by the time I've had my 4th cup of coffee, you know, and you know, and this helped me stay awake, more cognitively functional. But then it gradually faded away over a period of weeks. Then I boosted it a little bit. I started taking 10 micrograms every other day, and that brought it back for a while, but then that faded away, and so I didn't really pursue it after that, you know. And I started taking other things, like I've been taking Zembrin, which is interesting, you know. Nigel Garrick's plant from Scaletti and Tortuosa that he was working with. Did you see his talk on that, Guy? It's an interesting plant. It has there are about 17 alkaloids in it. Some of them are definitely serotonin uptake inhibitors. That's you know, that's all been measured. But there's more to it than that, because I feel an acute effect. And I'm a little bit, you know, if I'm going to be taking ayahuasca, I probably should stop that. I'm concerned about the interaction with MAO inhibitors. So, but it's also interesting. I take about 50 milligrams in the morning, and sometimes 50 milligrams in the afternoon, and that keeps me at least awake, which is good. Yeah, it's interesting. I wanted to ask you, John or Guy, about these. I wanted to ask you from a personal perspective about these waves, because I've been using this binaural beats app to try to get to sleep, and I've been putting it either on delta or theta, and put it on the timer for about 20 minutes or so, and it definitely does help me get to sleep. But I'm wondering, is that the right wavelength, or is there another better wavelength, or is that using it in the right way? Are you familiar with this app?
Yeah, I've seen some of those, and I used binaural beats. I've composed them too. They can work. The thing is, though, sound is working through the reptilian brain, isn't it? So through cerebellum and everything, reticular formation. So it's a very slow entrainment, and that's why I'm thinking you'll do better with the PyraLight pad, because it's magnetic and infrared. You know, the light. These infrared LEDs, light will penetrate into the body by about 6 centimeters. What you do is you just put it under your pillow overnight, and I've slept with it for months, and I love it. And I think that will work much more on the body level rather than the brain, because it's relaxing the whole body that's important. There's a comment I'd like to make about serotonin and dopamine, because again, this is one of these insights. You know, if you look at the tryptophan palace, to me, serotonin, because 80% of it's from the enteric brain, it's, you know, serotonin and oxytocin are non-dual. They generate joy. There's no addiction, there's no needing more and more of it or anything like that. But dopamine's a neurotoxin. So with a neurotoxin, you know, it's literally killing brain cells, killing the dopamine receptors. And so it's very dualistic. You take more and you need more. So the things I do in my practice are to generate serotonin, including visualizing. I actually bring it up from the enteric brain to the cardiac brain and into the cerebral brain. I use my hands to visualize bringing it up there, because the more things we do that stimulate dopamine, the more we're in this reactive, dualistic consciousness, and the more we're creating hell. You know, to me, and very, very simplistically, serotonin in the tryptamine palace is heaven, because it's unity. There's no duality there, it's just joy. Whereas dopamine is inherently dualistic. The more you have, the more you need, and all the addictive, you know, opiate type of alkaloid side effects. So I just want to throw that out there, because it's very much part of our normal consciousness in, you know, our religious culture in the West and everything else. Whereas in the more subtle Eastern traditions like Dzogchen and a lot of esoteric Buddhism, non-duality, and the same in yoga, Advaita Vedanta, it's about escaping, transcending the dualistic experience. And chemicals, if you're not careful, can accentuate duality inside us and make us more strung out, I would guess. Anyway, just throw that out there.
Guy, let me ask you, what kind of doses were you taking psilocybin at during the microdosing? Because I've been microdosing LSD, and I could tell you one of the main things that it does for me, kind of like Dennis said, is I'm sleeping better, but I'm also, how could I say it? I'm also forcing myself to go outside more. I've dealt with a lot of bullshit here recently, and I've always been a sky watcher, but it's like I'm forcing myself to go outside a lot more than I normally would. I mean, watching the moon set every night, sunset every night, sometimes staying up really late just because I'm so into the moment, you know. And that's one key thing I've really noticed with the LSD microdosing. When I started it, it wasn't quite a microdose. I did a little too much, and you know how that goes. But what were the levels of psilocybin that you were taking with the LSD?
It's actually very small. There's a vial I have that's a full dose. I think it's like one mushroom or whatever it is, but it's like a standardized dose. And I just take a small squirt of it. So I'm taking maybe 1%, approximately 1 or 2% of a full dose. But I could tell the difference. Now, of course, we adapt, like Dennis is saying, we adapt to everything. All that means is that our conscious focus has discounted it. But to me, I'm much more interested in what's going on physiologically. So, for example, with my practice, my Qigong, you know, I plateaued in yoga and Qigong years ago, if you like. But I can tell, looking back on 20 years of 3 hours a day daily practice, how I've changed. But in the plateau region, like year after year, it looks the same. I suggest the same is going on with the microdose. I'm just going to keep going for it, because I'm not really interested in having a physiologically obvious effect, because I think that keys into the addictive side of the mind. Oh, I need more. But actually, if we're working on the body level, just like spraying WD-40 so that you're running smoothly, that's cool by me. I don't need to know mentally that something is going on. I don't know if you heard the gecko. Gecko said gak, gak, gak. He always says yes when there's something cosmic, but he agrees with the gecko, says gak, gak, gak. So, anyway, that's two of us who agree. So I would say if you got something that's comfortable, even if you're not feeling it as oh, it's definitely different, keep going. As long as it's not causing any side effect, because some of these things, maybe 30 years time, you look back and you look at your friends and you see where you are mentally and emotionally and spiritually, and you see where they are. So it's, I discount the monkey mind as much as I can and pay attention to the intuition. And if your intuition is, you've had a taste of this and it's good, keep going with it subclinically, and maybe throw in the psilocybin, because first few days, like, wow, when I go and I, go and walk in my land and really feel a connection with nature. I do the same thing now. I look at the moon like you, at the stars every night. There's a subtle appreciation. My monkey mind has sort of discounted it, but I still spend the time looking because I know this is about connection, and connection is everything.
Well, and that's interesting that you say that, because I love nature. I love the stars. I do this stuff anyway. What I've noticed from the microdosing is just liking it a little bit more, to where, let's say when I hurt my wrist, I would still go outside. I would almost force myself into doing it, and then I would enjoy the shit out of it later, But I think I am going to try the psilocybin on top of it, because, as you know, after a few days or a few weeks, I should say, of microdosing, you start to even get used to that,
Right.
And that's okay. I think it's really okay. Because you get given, it's the same with the Ajna Light, you get given, and DMT, you get given the visions at the beginning. I call it to entertain the ego. Often people go into the void. People who've done, like Ocean did 700 hours. She said after about 30 or 40 hours on the Ajna Light, she got no visuals. That doesn't really matter. She was having emotional healing and stuff like that, but literally, she said she was out. She couldn't hear anything, see anything, and then she'd come back at the end. I call it the cosmic car wash. Who knows what's going on, but the effect was her life was much more functional. She dealt with a lot of childhood trauma emotionally that years of therapy hadn't helped. So, at the beginning, the ego is entertained, like with microdosing. If you pay attention and oh, this is good, and you keep going, then give yourself 20, 30 years.
Yeah, long-term experiment, right?
Better said than done.
With a full report, Zach. And maybe
I'll see you
those of us that are still
I'll tell you what's happening.
Listen, I hate to interrupt this, but I am going to have to leave. I've got another conference call coming up on something much more boring, but we've got this ESPD book we're trying to bring out, and so I have to meet with the editorial committee in about 15 minutes. And the book is going well, by the way. It will be out not before Christmas, unfortunately, but in January sometime.